10 years ago, RPG Maker was the big thing. PewDiePie and Markiplier were doing multi-million view Let's Plays. Both Tumblr and 4chan had their picks of favorite games with thriving fan communities, and Ao Oni even had a terrible movie based on it. What the fuck even is this? These days, while RPG Maker games are by no means dead, and we occasionally get a phenomenal game like Omori or Hylix 2, they're definitely past their golden age, and we no longer get fantastic releases back-to-back like we did in 2012. Despite this, I still find myself returning to the classics I played in high school, and for the most part, they actually hold up. Janky mechanics, edgelord stories and all, there's a peculiar charm and heart to these games. And while they might look primitive and even outright bad to those who haven't played them, there's a reason they left such an impact on those who did. As crude as some of these titles can be, they always had a very certain charm to them, and in many cases told stories that would either touch the player, such as the likes of To the Moon, or would present an odd and interesting world and experience like what could be found in Dot Flow. So indulge me, because I want to take a trip through memory lane. Much like in my previous video on classic creepypasta, I want to talk about why classic RPG Maker horror games mattered. Spoiler warning for all the games I'm about to talk about. Before we can talk about the games, I think it's important to give context as to what an RPG Maker game actually is. RPG Maker is a primitive and simple game engine that allows you to make top-down style games. Its origin dates all the way back to 1988 on the Nippon Electric PC-88 home computer. Obviously, it was built with JRPGs in mind, but the engine has gone on to be used to create all kinds of different styles of games. There are near countless different versions of the engine that you can buy, with most of them being Japanese only. However, that hasn't stopped plenty of people from illegally translating them, hence the need to download fan patches for most of the games built in RPG Maker 2003 and Wolf. When you start to delve into the RPG Maker scene, especially its horror section, you might notice outside of a handful of titles, there's a severe lack of actual RPGs, and that's because the engine itself is just a great tool for less experienced developers to create smaller games with basic mechanics in order to tell a story, or even just make a more puzzle-based game using the isometric view and borderline NES-style mechanics. While in most cases this would lead to some pretty lifeless and boring titles, it's the limitations of the engine that actually help it thrive. When you strip away the flair and cut the fat out of an experience, it allows developers to have a sharper focus on what matters and get creative with finding ways of engaging the player. These limitations would lead to some of the most influential games being made and setting the bar for what it takes to make a good RPG Maker game. And when it comes to limited gameplay creating a truly engaging experience, I can't think of any better example than If we're going to talk about RPG Maker, we have to talk about what might be the most influential and popular game to ever come out of the genre, the one and only Yume Nikki. One of my first videos was about this game, and that's because it's one of my all-time favorites. Yume Nikki can best be described as a surreal walking simulator, made by the sole developer Kikiyama over the course of a few years. The entire thing is a strange and hypnotic experience. From the music, aimless gameplay, and jarring, often uncomfortable set pieces, Yume Nikki is a complete clusterfuck of a game. And much like LSD Dream Emulator, which obviously served as a massive bit of inspiration for Yume Nikki, it's arguably not even a game, it's just an odd experience. All you really do is walk around and look at stuff and experience the occasional random event. And by no means am I trying to shit on the game either, because it's a classic for a reason. Yume Nikki has some of the best atmosphere I have ever experienced in a game and nails the theme of isolation perfectly. That being said, a gratifying horror experience, Yume Nikki is not. The true hook to the game is its brilliant use of atmosphere and immersion. It's easy to just get sucked into the hypnotic music loops and otherworldly art design, spending hours walking around, eagerly awaiting for the next set piece, or to stumble upon another hidden area of the game. There's no linearity to it either, at least outside of when you encounter a room or NPC that you need a specific effect to interact with, which is the only real goal of the game, collecting its 27 effects, giving you an alternate skin with an ability, or even just an item that you can use to interact with the world around you. The glue of Yume Nikki is its theme of loneliness, so when encounters like the one with Uboa or the alien piano man happen, they leave a lasting impact, especially since most of these aren't even guaranteed, making each playthrough unique and different. To give an example, Uboa's event can be triggered by turning the lights on and off in Poniko's room, a location in the Pink Sea, which in of itself is an area that you need to find a hidden portal in the snow world to get to. Uboa only has a 1 in 64 chance of spawning upon entering Poniko's room, and if he does, you'll be stuck inside until you interact with him, and once you do, you will again be teleported, this time to Uboa's trap, a nightmarish area of the game with some striking images and sinister implications. There is no escape from this until you pinch yourself awake and leave the dream world. This is one of the game's strongest aspects as well, implication. Yume Nikki's story, or lack thereof, has led to countless fan theories of how to interpret and view the things we see. From the dead body in the forest, Uboa himself, the many uterus-shaped creatures, none of it is ever explained. And this is all without mentioning the odd and often otherworldly music the game plays throughout. While nerds like to argue if this truly counts as a horror game or not, I don't really think it matters. The game is an odd and haunting experience. It's served as direct inspiration to countless games and spawned its own subgenre. And this is an overall experience I can't recommend enough. One of my favorites from the classic era of RPG Maker horror was a cute little sleeper hit named Ebe. To say Ebe is a popular game is an understatement. Thanks to the likes of PewDiePie, the game blew up and became insanely popular. Though, outside of its rather terrible dialogue...
Gary, you're just a weirdo. I like yellow, but I also like pink. Oh, and blue. Cookies, and cake, and chocolate. Teehee, so much to eat.
and some clunky sections here and there, it's still a game worth your time and one I plan to cover in far greater detail at some point. Ebe is a masterpiece in the RPG Maker world. The game captures lightning in a bottle, and that's due to its masterful use of atmosphere and set pieces. The game takes place in an art gallery, already giving it an extremely unique and interesting identity. And unlike a game like Five Nights at Freddy's where the location is more of a gimmick, the art gallery is used in every way, shape, and form to mess with the player. The setting is naturally creepy, playing on the fear of familiarity similar to liminal spaces. The art gallery is already a pretty creepy place to be once it goes dark and there's no one else around. Being alone in a place we associate with crowds already creates a certain tension and isolating feeling. But the game takes this even further with its use of interesting set pieces. One of the first scares in the game really nails this by simply being a shadow we see walk past a window. And as silly as it sounds, it actually got me the first time I played the game. Although this is also where we see Ebe show just how clunky and silly it can be by taking this too far and having the shadow come back and knock. While it's not quite a jump scare, it does break the atmosphere with how cheesy and lame it is, like, "Oh hey guys, did you not see me before?" Besides moments like that, the horror of this game reminds me a lot of Silent Hill 3, where there are long stretches of nothing, and sometimes the scare is just a creepy sound or odd thing that you come across. But that's not to say Eve is another walking simulator like Yume Nikki. There are enemies, and you can die. The enemies themselves are quite interesting too. All of them are themed around the art gallery and oftentimes by the section they're placed in. Some of them being mannequins and others being paintings that come to life, becoming more twisted the deeper into the art gallery that you go. The same can be said about the gallery itself, starting off as a seemingly normal location with some odd paranormal shit here and there, to being trapped in a crayon world with cartoonish logic. There's a very child-esque quality implied throughout the game, fitting with the main character herself only being about 12 years old or so, and that's something important to take note of. Unlike most games, Eve doesn't focus on what scares adults. Rather, it tries to take common irrational childhood fears and make them come to life. Great examples are the previously mentioned paintings and mannequins. I'm sure all of us at some point in our childhood came across some pretty uncanny mannequins that freaked us out. I mean, just watch that fucking I Feel Fantastic video. And thanks to Toy Story, the idea of inanimate objects coming to life was ingrained in our heads, especially the idea that not all of them might be so nice. Though if I had to pick the best set piece in the game that shows Eve's full hand of cards, it would be the doll room. At a certain point in the game, you're playing as the character Gary and find yourself coming across a room full of these creepy blue dolls. They don't do anything besides sit around and occasionally change locations, nothing too out of ordinary for what the art gallery has already thrown at you, but at one point you re-enter the doll room and, well, this happens. This is my favorite scene in the game. It shows off exactly what makes Eve such a special game. The unconventional take on horror was a breath of fresh air at the time. Back in 2012, we were dealing with the consequences of Amnesia: The Dark Descent and the litany of shock horror games that came from it. In a time where every horror game had to make you some defenseless prick constantly being jump scared and chased around, it was refreshing to play a game that indulged more in its atmosphere and played into a very different sense of fear. And I haven't even brought up the endings yet. While I won't spoil them here, your choices throughout the game will determine which of the many endings you can get. And let's just say, outside of one generally good ending, there are quite a few tragic and haunting ways that Eve can come to an end. Out of all the games we're talking about today, Aoni is the one that's aged the worst. The game itself was janky when it came out back in 2008 or so this really isn't a surprise. While I can't really speak much on how well the game did in Japan outside of it obviously having a movie based on it, in the West, it came to prominence mostly due to PewDiePie making a Let's Play of it back in 2011. Arguably opening the floodgates of RPG Maker horror games to the masses. Something that seems to be a bit of a theme for this video. You can disagree with me all you want, but if it wasn't for Felix, I highly doubt many of the RPG Maker games we now look at as classics would have gotten the same attention or acclaim that they have now. To talk about the game itself, however, Aoni is a haunted house simulator. Rather than being the walking sim or spooky puzzle game these titles usually opt to be, Aoni takes elements of both, but it emphasizes more on exploring a sprawling mansion and escaping from the blue demon himself when he decides to show up. When I originally played this game as a kid, the chase segment scared the shit out of me. These days, it's just goofy as fuck. Look at this. Despite my mocking, this is actually the scariest part of the game though, if I'm being honest. Although it's by no means because of the obviously intense, heart-throbbing gameplay. No, it's the awful ear rape music that plays every fucking time the demon shows up. Make it stop! I guess Pewds really was right in the case of my ears when he made the "It's raping time" joke back in the day. To add to the cheesiness of the entire game, its story is something to behold. And by behold, I mean it's pants on head neurodivergent. The game has you play as Hiroshi when he and his Scooby-Doo gang of teenage friends decide to explore an abandoned mansion that's famous for people going missing in it. Upon entering, they quickly realize the doors have locked and they're stuck inside. It doesn't take long for spooky shit to start happening and Aoni himself to show up and begin picking off our characters left and right. So, your standard summer horror movie type story. To expand on the gameplay, outside of the chase sequences, the game has some light RPG elements and a heavy focus on puzzle solving. Though these elements can vary depending on which version of the game you decide to play, and despite my jabs at the horror elements in the game, it does have a few effective, cheap jump scares. And the various designs of the demon can get pretty creepy. I mean, he never stops looking hilarious, but the half-animated, half-edited photo style of the monster is actually pretty uncanny, and in some of his forms is diet nightmare fuel. He just has a surreal and kind of disgusting vibe to him. It's something they really nailed in the movie adaptation. For anyone familiar with Japanese cinema, the CGI is usually pretty bad and cheesy, but in this case it actually helps reflect the uncanniness from the game, at least his main form. There's another version where he looks like this, and he just looks like a demon version of Domo-kun. But that's not here nor there. While I refuse to apologize for the flack I've given this game, I can't say it's actually all that bad. It's nothing that will blow your mind, but if you want a semi-frustrating but entertaining couple of hours, I'd still recommend Aoni. Plus, it's a classic and did a lot for the RPG Maker world back in the day. Alright, I know, Mad Father is the developer's more popular and more well-known work, and yeah, I know, this game bites a lot of Corpse Party, but come on, Misao is my favorite. Of all the non-Yume Nikki-like RPG Maker games, this one is definitely the best, at least to me. It's violent, cheesy, over the top, and fully aware of how stupid it is, and I love it. The game uses all of this to add to its charm. Misao is the video game equivalent to something like Scream. You like scary movies? By no means a parody, but definitely a piece of satire that revels in lambasting while simultaneously celebrating the genre that it's part of. The game itself is the most conventional horror game off this list, with its clever use of atmosphere, a cult-themed story with a serial killer, and a cast of unlikable teenage pricks getting exactly what they deserve. In Misao, we follow a character as they try to survive a paranormal other world that takes over their school. Shh, I know, Corpse Party. You spend the game trying not to die at every corner as you find items and solve puzzles in an attempt to appease the spirit of Misao, a girl who was mistreated by nearly all the people in her life and later murdered by one of the characters we're stuck in the school with. The goal of the game is to collect all her scattered body parts hidden around the school, and while this sounds a tad cliche, the real heart of this game is the over-the-top and borderline comical situations it throws you in. From having to hide in a dead bear just to not get chainsawed in half, to opening a door only to fall into an endless void Looney Tunes style. The game does not take itself seriously in the slightest. When I previously mentioned a large part of the gameplay is not dying at every corner, I wasn't exaggerating. Everything in this game kills you, and often in a funny and unique way. There's even a menu that shows you all the ways that you found to die in this game, outright encouraging you to look for more, and there's a great mixture of brutal and funny ways to meet your end. Misao thrives off its shock value and satirical nature, and this really helps the game avoid falling into the typical frustrating messes that many other RPG Maker games end up being. Yeah, I'm talking about you overhyped piece of shit. Overall, the gameplay can be summed up as a hammy take on Silent Hill minus the combat. And to bring this story up again, I actually really like it. It's definitely cheesy and tongue-in-cheek, but that doesn't stop it from telling a compelling tale with a character you learn to care about, even offering a post-story mode called Truth that acts as an epilogue of sorts and fleshes out many of the characters' motivations and backstories. Without just doing a play-by-play or full-on review, there isn't much else to say besides buy Misao on Steam and give it a playthrough. It's more than worth your time. Every genre has its masterpiece, and while many will point to Yume Nikki, in my opinion, RPG Maker as a whole's masterpiece is Off, an odd little French game that was first uploaded online in 2008. Off is the only title I'm talking about today that can actually be considered an RPG, turn-based combat and all. The game was developed by Mortis Ghost, and to call it a horror game is a bit of a stretch, though it is a title with some sinister elements and a truly haunting story. The game is more surreal than anything. I mean, just look at these visuals. The game's use of pencil sketch characters contrasting with the colorful and blocky design of the world creates this near psychedelic dissonance that I have yet to see replicated in any other game. And this use of color really adds a lot of intrigue as well. The gameplay, unlike most RPG Maker games, actually has some variety to it. Rather than just focusing on one item A or B puzzle solving or just exploring a sprawling world, Off's gameplay is much more akin to JRPGs of old, as well as the puzzles are actually more brain teaser-esque than anything else you would find in the genre. Other big parts of the gameplay include exploration and character conversations, though if I were to throw any actual criticism at this thing, its combat leaves a lot to be desired and a lot of times it just slows the game down. In Off, you play as the Batter, a humble little character that goes to 3 zones with 3 bases trying to get home. Hold up.
He's staring that one down!
The Batter travels to various areas of the game's world with a mission to quote-unquote purify them. The world you explore is as bizarre as the characters who reside in it, and as much as I want to delve into the story, this is one of those games I just kind of refuse to spoil. Sorry, I guess? Off is just one of those games that you're better off playing. It truly is a masterpiece. Its story is full of intriguing and playful dialogue, sinister implications, and one of the best twists in gaming history. I just can't stress enough how fucking good this game is, and how much better it would be if you played through it blind. So while I won't go into the story, I will say Off's soundtrack is as good, if not better, than the art style. The OST is chock full of ambient pieces like some trippy beat-oriented music like Avatar, and especially the fantastic and iconic battle music Pepper Steak. Every aspect of the game's presentation is phenomenal and a key aspect to the experience as a whole. RPG Maker games are typically scored using less than inspired music that does little more than fill the space of silence. So when I jump into one of these things, I'm really not expecting a great soundtrack. But much like Yume Nikki, Off is scored with a soundtrack fitting its legendary status. And just to set the record straight, the Batter did nothing wrong. RPG Maker games might always be a niche that not everyone finds interest in, but to those who do, they're a very special experience. It's honestly a little crazy to see just how important these little games have been over the years in terms of serving as inspirations to many high-profile games, as well as producing their own classics. There's a timeless charm about them that really keeps them from falling into any of the pitfalls or shortcomings many other games do. With titles like Yume Nikki and Off serving as key inspiration to hundreds of games at this point, their ability to maintain a surprising level of notoriety and popularity 10 to even 20 years after their initial release as freeware games is, well, it's impressive. I had a lot of fun talking about and revisiting these games, and I haven't even mentioned many of the other classics like Corpse Party, Mad Father, Lisa, and The Witch's House, and who knows, I might give these games a video of their own as well. But that being said, subscribe, support me on Patreon, follow me on Twitter. I'll see you in the next video.
It's me, Madison Ray. Play up, you pathetic little babe pitties.